True peril often creeps in with absolute quiet, unlike the usual blare of alarms. A sun-drenched Tuesday afternoon in a suburban shopping center was violently disrupted when a law enforcement officer's authority became a tool of unreasoning bias. One man's simple aim was to provide for his household. The other's was to inflate his own importance. Neither could have predicted the catastrophic clash that was about to unfold. The bright sun blazed down on the expansive asphalt of the Oak Creek Plaza parking lot in Denver Stone. A man whose broad build and quiet presence naturally garnered respect was pushing a heavily laden shopping cart towards his 2024 Chevrolet Tahoe. Within the vehicle, securely fastened in her child seat and engrossed in a cartoon on a tablet, was his 4-year-old daughter, Lily. It was a scene of perfect ordinariness. Denver transferred bags of provisions, fresh produce, a gallon of milk, and a box of Lily's cherished strawberry cereal into the roomy cargo area of the SUV. He worked with a practiced, deliberate efficiency that would go unnoticed by a casual observer. This efficiency was the result of 15 years of intense, high-stakes tactical conditioning. However, on this particular day, Denver was not on duty. He was simply a father running errands on his day off, clad in a worn gray sweatshirt, comfortable athletic shorts, and a well-loved baseball cap pulled low to ward off the afternoon glare. Across the parking lot, Officer Bell Jenkins sat with his black and white patrol car, idling. Jenkins, a 12-year veteran of the local police force, had a career quietly tarnished by numerous complaints of excessive force and a clear history of racially motivated stops that the department's union had consistently suppressed. Jenkins tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, his gaze sweeping across the lot, not for actual criminal activity, but for anything that offended his rigid, prejudiced outlook, his attention fixed on Denver. In Jenkins' mind, the equation was tragically straightforward and terribly flawed. A black man in casual attire loading groceries into a $90,000 luxury SUV in an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood didn't align with his expectations. The insidious whisper of prejudice convinced Jenkins that the vehicle must be stolen, or at the very least, that Denver didn't belong there. Without a second thought, Jenkins put the cruiser in motion. He did not check the Tahoe's license plate. He did not observe any traffic infractions. He simply acted on a dark impulse of profiling. Denver had just placed the final grocery bag in the trunk and was reaching up to activate the automatic closing mechanism when the harsh screech of tires shattered the suburban tranquility. The patrol cruiser aggressively cut in directly behind the Tahoe, effectively trapping Denver. The cruiser's red and blue lights illuminated, casting an aggressive strobing glare across the side of the silver SUV. Denver's instincts, sharpened by years of protecting the nation's highest-ranking officials, immediately kicked in. His heart rate remained stable, but his senses became acutely focused. He did not flinch. He slowly lowered his hand from the trunk button and turned, keeping his hands completely visible and away from his pockets. The heavy door of the cruiser swung open and Officer Jenkins stepped out. His hand was already resting ominously on the butt of his holstered sidearm. His stance was wide and aggressive, projecting an unearned authority designed to intimidate. "Step away from the vehicle," Jenkins commanded, his voice echoing across the parked cars, drawing the attention of passing shoppers. Denver maintained his composure. He took one slow step to the side, distancing himself from the open trunk but remaining close enough to position himself between the officer and his daughter in the back seat. "Is there a problem, officer?" Denver inquired. His voice was deep, calm, and entirely devoid of the panic Jenkins anticipated and desired. "I said step away from the car." "Hands where I can see them," Jenkins bellowed, closing the distance. "Whose vehicle is this?" "It's mine," Denver replied evenly. "My daughter is in the back seat. I'm just loading my groceries. What seems to be the issue? Don't play games with me, Jenkins sneered, stopping a few feet away, his eyes scanning Denver's casual clothing, his lip curling in evident disdain. A guy like you doesn't drive a car like this out here. Hand over your ID and the keys. Now. Denver recognized the situation instantly. He had seen it on the news, read the reports, and felt its agonizing reality within his own community. He was being profiled. However, Denver also possessed an intimate understanding of the law. Officer, I haven't committed any traffic violations and I am parked legally, Denver stated, his tone remaining respectful but remarkably firm. Unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, you are not authorized to demand my identification or my keys under state law. Jenkins' face flushed a deep, ugly red. He was completely unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by someone he had already deemed beneath him. To Jenkins, a refusal to submit without question was an act of profound disrespect. He perceived Denver's calm assertion of his constitutional rights not as legal knowledge, but as dangerous insubordination. Listen to me, boy, Jenkins hissed, taking another step forward, encroaching on Denver's personal space. The derogatory term slipped out effortlessly, betraying the deep-seated racism fueling the encounter. You're in my town now. I give the orders. You're going to give me your ID or I am going to rip you out of those shorts and find it myself. Do you understand me? Denver's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The slur registered, a cold spark igniting in his chest, but his training overrode his anger. Emotion was the enemy of survival in a volatile situation. I strongly suggest you step back, officer, Denver said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the undeniable weight of command. You are escalating a situation without cause. I will not hand over my keys, and I will not reach for my wallet while you are in an agitated state. Bystanders had begun to pause. A woman pushing a cart stopped, withdrawing her phone from her purse. A man walking his dog stood frozen at the edge of the lot. The growing audience only intensified Jenkins' fury. He felt his authority disintegrating in front of the very public he believed he was policing. Agitated, Jenkins roared. I'll show you agitated. In a move of shocking, disproportionate violence, Jenkins unclasped his holster. The metallic click of the holster snapping open sounded like a thunderclap to Denver. Before Denver could utter another word of de-escalation, Jenkins drew his Glock 19. He did not keep it at a low ready. He leveled the barrel directly at Denver's chest. On the ground, face down on the asphalt. Now! Jenkins screamed, his voice cracking with a terrifying mixture of adrenaline and rage. A collective gasp echoed from the onlookers. Several people screamed and ducked behind cars. The woman filming with her phone raised it higher, her hands shaking violently. Inside the Tahoe, little Lily, oblivious to the lethal threat mere feet away, giggled at her cartoon. Denver's tactical mind processed the variables in milliseconds. Distance, 5 feet. Cover, none. Threat level, critical. The officer's finger was inside the trigger guard. One flinch, one misunderstood movement, and Denver would be dead in a grocery store parking lot. The primary objective immediately shifted from asserting his rights to ensuring his survival for the next 60 seconds, so his daughter wouldn't witness his death. Slowly, fluidly, Denver raised both hands high in the air, his palms flat and facing Jenkins. I am complying, Denver said, his voice a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. Please, my 4-year-old daughter is in the car. Keep your weapon pointed away from the vehicle. Shut your mouth and get on the ground, Jenkins bellowed, advancing. Denver dropped slowly to his knees, taking immense care to make no sudden movements, and then lowered his torso flat onto the sun-baked asphalt. The rough surface bit into his skin, but he ignored it. He laced his fingers behind his head, exactly as trained. Jenkins lunged forward, pressing his heavy knee ruthlessly into the center of Denver's spine. The breath was forced from Denver's lungs in a sharp rush. Jenkins holstered his weapon, maintaining the crushing weight on Denver's back, and violently wrenched Denver's left arm behind him, snapping a cold steel handcuff onto his wrist. He did the same to the right, clicking the cuffs down tight enough to immediately restrict blood flow. "Not so tough now, are you?" Jenkins sneered near Denver's ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. "Thought you could smart off to me? You people never learn." "You're making a catastrophic mistake," Denver said quietly into the pavement. "I'm making an arrest," Jenkins shot back, yanking Denver up by the chain of the handcuffs. Denver grimaced as fire shot through his shoulders, but he forced himself to his feet. At that moment, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the air. Jenkins had apparently activated his emergency radio during the escalation. 2 more patrol cars screamed into the parking lot, tires smoking as they skidded to a halt. 3 officers piled out, drawing their weapons and rushing the scene. "I got him! He's secured!" Jenkins yelled to his colleagues, puffing out his chest. "Refused lawful orders. Suspected grand theft auto. Resisting arrest." A younger officer, Tom Riley, approached cautiously. He looked at Denver, who was standing calmly despite the painful angle of his arms, and then at the luxury SUV, its trunk still wide open, revealing bags of groceries. Riley frowned. The scene didn't match the frantic call. "We need to identify him," Jenkins ordered Riley. "Check his pockets. He refused to show ID." Officer Riley stepped up to Denver. "Sir, I'm going to reach into your back pocket to retrieve your wallet," Riley said, his tone nervous but professional. "It's in my front right pocket," Denver replied steadily. "Be careful when you pull it out." Riley reached into the sweatpants pocket and pulled out a sleek black leather bifold wallet. He flipped it open to look for a driver's license. Instead of a standard state ID, the first thing that caught the sunlight was a solid, gleaming gold star resting on a silver shield embedded deeply in the leather. Riley stopped breathing. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. He stared at the badge, then looked up at Denver, then back down at the credentials on the opposite side of the wallet. It read, United States Secret Service. Below it was Denver's photo, identifying him as a special agent, counter-assault team, KT, with top-tier security clearance. The air seemed to get sucked entirely out of the parking lot. "What is it, Riley?" Jenkins snapped, impatient with the rookie's sudden paralysis. "Give me that." Jenkins snatched the wallet from Riley's trembling hand. He looked down. For 3 agonizing seconds there was absolute silence, save for the muffled cartoon music playing from the Tahoe. Jenkins stared at the gold badge. His brain, clouded by prejudice and adrenaline, refused to process the visual information. This is a fake," Jenkins stammered, his voice suddenly lacking its previous booming authority. "It's a prop. Where did you buy this?" "Officer Riley," Denver spoke, completely ignoring Jenkins. His voice was no longer that of a compliant civilian. It was the voice of a federal agent who commanded rooms in the White House. "Look at the holographic seal on the ID card. Look at the microprinting. You know what you're looking at." Riley swallowed hard. "Brad," he whispered to Jenkins, his face completely pale. "Brad, it's real. He's federal." Jenkins shouted, though panic was visibly seizing his features. His grip on the wallet tightened. He looked at Denver, seeing him for the first time, not as a caricature, but as a man entirely unfazed by the handcuffs. "He's a liar. He stole this car. And he probably stole this badge." "Officer Jenkins," Denver said, his eyes locking onto the racist cop with terrifying, icy precision. "In my vehicle in the center console lockbox is a federally issued Sig Sauer P229. Do not attempt to open it. I am currently the detail leader for a protected political asset visiting this state tomorrow. You have unlawfully detained a federal agent. You have drawn a lethal weapon on an unarmed citizen without probable cause, and you did it on camera." Denver nodded his chin toward the dozen or so bystanders who were now recording from multiple angles. Jenkins took a step back, looking around at the sea of smartphones pointed directly at him. The gravity of his monumental error began to crash down upon him like an avalanche. He had let his prejudice drive him to pull a gun on a highly trained, deeply connected federal law enforcement officer. "Uncuff him, Brad," Riley said, his voice urgent. "Uncuff him right now." Jenkins stood frozen, the wallet still in his hand, his career, his freedom, and his entire life flashing before his eyes as the trap of his own making snapped violently shut. Officer Bell Jenkins stood paralyzed, his mind frantically rejecting the reality of the golden shield resting heavy in his palm. His breathing turned ragged. The world around him seemed to shrink, narrowing down to the unblinking, steely gaze of Denver Stone. "I said, uncuff him, Brad," Officer Tom Riley shouted, his voice cracking with unprecedented authority as he stepped between Jenkins and the federal agent. Riley, a rookie who had spent the last 6 months quietly documenting Jenkins' questionable stops in a personal notebook, finally found his breaking point. He reached out and forcefully ripped the keys from Jenkins' duty belt. "Don't you touch me, Riley," Jenkins snapped, instinctively reaching for the rookie's collar. But the hesitation in his movement betrayed his crumbling bravado. He was entirely out of his depth, and the sinking feeling in his stomach told him his career was already over. Riley ignored the threat, stepping behind Denver. With shaking hands, he inserted the small key into the steel cuffs. The mechanisms clicked, and the heavy metal fell away, dropping to the asphalt with a sharp clatter. Denver brought his arms forward slowly, rubbing his wrists to restore circulation. He didn't stretch, didn't sigh, didn't break eye contact with Jenkins. He simply smoothed the front of his gray sweatshirt and turned his attention to the rookie. "Officer Riley, secure his duty weapon now." "You can't give orders here," Jenkins spat, though he took another step backward. "I am a sworn officer of the Oak Creek Police Department. You are a suspect until I verify that badge." "Verify this." A new booming voice echoed across the parking lot. A sleek black Chevrolet Suburban, identically styled to Denver's but sporting covert federal plates, had silently glided into the lot, bypassing the police blockade. Out stepped Special Agent in Charge, Arthur Sterling, a man whose tailored suit and silver hair projected absolute, uncompromising authority. Behind him, 2 more agents in tactical gear poured out, their hands resting cautiously near their own holstered weapons. Sterling didn't even look at Jenkins. He marched straight to Denver. "Agent Stone, report. Unlawful detainment, assault under color of law, and brandishing a firearm without probable cause." "Sir," Denver replied crisply, his posture straightening into formal attention. "My daughter is in the vehicle. The scene is currently unsecured." Sterling's eyes finally snapped to Jenkins. The look was cold enough to freeze nitrogen. "Lieutenant Harrison Cole of your department is exactly 2 minutes away. Until he arrives, you will stand perfectly still. Officer Jenkins, if you move your hands toward your belt, my agents will interpret it as a lethal threat. Do we have an understanding?" Jenkins opened his mouth to argue, to invoke police union protections, to spin the narrative. But the words died in his throat. The crowd of bystanders had grown, their phones recording every humiliating second. He was surrounded by federal agents, a rookie who had turned on him, and a furious public. He slowly raised his hands, a pathetic mirror image of what he had forced Denver to do just moments prior. When Lieutenant Cole arrived, sirens blaring, He took one look at the standoff and immediately grasped the catastrophic magnitude of the situation. Cole was a rigidly principled man who had spent years trying to root out the department's old boys club that protected men like Jenkins. "Strip him," Cole ordered Officer Riley, pointing a trembling finger at Jenkins. "Badge and gun. Right now, you are suspended, pending immediate termination." "Bell, Harrison, you can't do this," Jenkins pleaded, his voice cracking, the arrogant sneer completely replaced by desperate panic. "He resisted. He looked suspicious. I was doing my job." "Your job," Agent Sterling interrupted, stepping inches from Jenkins' face, "was to serve and protect. Instead, you pulled a Glock on a top-tier federal operative because you didn't like the color of his skin in this zip code. The FBI Civil Rights Division has already been notified. You aren't just losing your badge, Jenkins. You are losing your freedom." While the local command scrambled to contain the PR nightmare, Denver simply turned his back on the disgraced cop. He walked to the rear door of his Tahoe and opened it. Little Lily was still absorbed in her cartoon, completely insulated from the terrifying reality that had just unfolded outside her window. "Hey, sweetie," Denver said, his voice instantly softening, all the tactical edge melting away into pure paternal warmth. "Daddy's just finishing up. We're going to get ice cream on the way home, okay?" Lily beamed, her bright eyes shining. "Strawberry. Double strawberry," Denver promised, kissing her forehead. He closed the door, knowing that protecting her innocence was the most important victory of the day. Public outrage ignited instantly. The fallout from the grocery store parking lot was spectacular, swift, and entirely devoid of the usual institutional bureaucracy that so often shields corrupt officers from genuine consequence. The viral video of the incident, capturing Bell Jenkins drawing his weapon on a compliant, unarmed black father who turned out to be a high-ranking Secret Service agent, dominated national news cycles for weeks. The Oak Creek Police Department was immediately thrown under a massive federal consent decree, their every move scrutinized by the Department of Justice. But for Jenkins, the nightmare was uniquely, devastatingly personal. Initially, he tried to cling to his old hubris. He hired Gregory Hartman, a shark in a tailored suit and a notorious defense attorney who had built a lucrative career getting aggressive cops off the hook by loudly citing split-second decision-making and officer safety defenses. Sitting in Hartman's plush downtown office, Jenkins felt a brief surge of his old arrogance return. Hartman confidently assured his client that the local police union would happily foot the massive six-figure legal bill. Jenkins truly believed the thin blue line would hold tight, just as it always had. Then came the twist that shattered his reality. The FBI investigation, spearheaded by Special Agent Richard Belmont, dug far deeper than the surface-level altercation in the parking lot. Belmont was meticulous and unyielding. He secured a federal search warrant for Jenkins' home and personal electronics. Deep within the digital guts of a hidden burner phone, federal cyber technicians cracked a heavily encrypted messaging application. What they unearthed was the final nail in Jenkins' coffin. It was a private, invitation-only chat group named The Watchman. It operated as a localized digital cesspool for right-wing extremists wearing badges, and Jenkins was one of its most prolific contributors. His daily electronic communications served as a chilling chronicle of his own self-aggrandizement, meticulously detailing how he specifically targeted drivers from minority backgrounds, conjured justifications for stops out of thin air, and employed disproportionate force for his own depraved entertainment. When Agent Belmont presented a substantial printed compilation of these digital exchanges to the head of the local police union, an immediate and profound silence fell over the room. Within less than 24 hours, the union completely disassociated itself from Jenkins, issuing a scathing public denouncement of his conduct and fully retracting their financial support. Gregory Hartman, instantly recognizing that any potential for union funding had evaporated and that he would instead inherit a disastrous public relations crisis, terminated his representation of Jenkins with a curt two-sentence email. Almost instantly, Jenkins found himself utterly penniless, compelled to depend on an overworked public defender to confront the immense, virtually unlimited resources of the federal government. The trial commenced 6 months later within the hushed, wood-paneled chambers of the federal courthouse. Presiding over the proceedings was Judge William Harper, a stern, no-nonsense jurist known for his extremely limited tolerance for corruption disguised as lawful authority. Assistant United States Attorney Catherine Dubois approached the case with meticulous precision. She did not merely present the viral video, she dissected it frame by agonizing frame. She called Officer Tom Riley to the stand. The young recruit, appearing pale yet determined, testified with tears in his eyes about Jenkins' long, disturbing pattern of racial profiling and the toxic atmosphere he had attempted to impose upon newer officers. However, the single most impactful moment of the entire trial occurred when Denver Stone was called to testify. Denver proceeded to the witness stand clad in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. His demeanor was one of remarkable composure, his voice projecting with clarity and steadiness across the hushed courtroom. He did not speak with the fiery indignation that Jenkins' defense attorney had desperately hoped to exploit. Instead, Denver spoke with the dispassionate, irrefutable objectivity of an expert tactical consultant detailing a critical breakdown in procedure. "Agent Stone," Prosecutor Dubois inquired, stepping back to allow the jury to focus entirely on the witness. "When the defendant drew his weapon, what was your tactical assessment of the situation?" Denver's gaze briefly shifted towards the defense table before settling firmly on the jury box. "My assessment, ma'am," Denver stated calmly, "was that I was facing an untrained, highly emotionally compromised individual who was actively seeking a pretext to deploy lethal force. His finger was on the trigger. His stance was unstable. He was not securing the scene. He was acting on personal prejudice. Had I sneezed? Had I stumbled? Had my daughter opened her car door? I am statistically certain he would have discharged his weapon." Seated at the defense table, in an inexpensive, ill-fitting suit purchased off the rack, Jenkins stared blankly at the floor. He appeared dramatically diminished, his face aged by a decade in mere months. The arrogant, seemingly untouchable aggressor from the parking lot had been completely dismantled by the relentless, crushing machinery of federal prosecution. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The 4-4 announced the verdict in a clear, unwavering voice. Guilty on all counts, including deprivation of rights under color of law and assault with a deadly weapon. During the sentencing hearing a week later, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Judge Harper gazed down from the elevated bench at Jenkins with undisguised righteous disdain. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings, "you were granted the profound trust of your community. You weaponized that trust to terrorize a citizen based solely on your own ignorant, hateful biases. You did not just fail your badge, you actively disgraced it. It is the absolute duty of this court to ensure you never hold power over another human being again." Judge Harper raised his wooden gavel high and brought it down with a crack like a rifle shot. 12 years in a federal penitentiary, no possibility of early parole. The harsh reality struck Jenkins with the devastating force of a derailed freight train. As a convicted federal felon for civil rights violations, his law enforcement pension was completely and irrevocably revoked. Without an income, his bank foreclosed on his home within weeks, leaving him with absolutely nothing. As the federal marshals clamped heavy iron chains around Jenkins' wrists and ankles to escort him away, his vacant, terrified eyes briefly met Denver's across the gallery. There was no longer any defiance in the disgraced officer, only a sickening recognition of the grim future that awaited him. Former police officers do not fare well in the general population of a federal prison, particularly those convicted of racially motivated civil rights offenses. Jenkins would spend the next decade in solitary confinement, locked alone in a small concrete cell for 23 hours a day, a miserable prisoner of his own making. Denver watched him shuffle through the heavy wooden doors, feeling no vengeful glee, only a somber, quiet satisfaction that a dangerous perpetrator had been permanently removed from the public. He walked out of the heavy brass doors of the courthouse, stepping onto the wide granite steps and into the bright, warming afternoon sun. He took a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling the heavy burden of the past 6 months finally lift from his broad shoulders. His phone buzzed steadily in his pocket. He pulled it out to see his wife's name illuminated on the screen. She was calling to confirm she had just picked up Lily from her kindergarten class. "We're heading to the park, honey," she said, her voice acting as an immediate soothing balm to his frayed nerves. "Are you on your way?" "I'm leaving now," Denver replied, a genuine, relaxed smile finally breaking across his face for the first time that day. He walked toward his vehicle, the keys jingling softly in his hand. "Tell Lily I'm bringing strawberry ice cream." True justice is a rare occurrence, but when it is delivered, it fundamentally reshapes the landscape of accountability. This encounter serves as proof that prejudice blinds individuals to reality, inevitably leading to their own downfall. A prejudice badge met a righteous defense, and the law ultimately upheld the truth. For every corrupt official who abuses their authority, a reckoning awaits in the shadows, prepared to strip them of their power and deliver undeniable, hard-earned karma.